Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie. Before I get into the video, I wanted to say there is a link in the description box to a GoFundMe to help Ala and her family whilst they're stuck in Gaza, which if you can check out, I would be grateful. I think I've kind of said this in recent videos, but I'm having like a pain flare-up, bad time mostly, and today my pain is pretty high, so I hope you can bear with me, but hopefully this is a fairly low spoon video to film because it's going to be like a summer book haul. So these are the books that I've got in the past like 3 months. We're going to talk about it anyway. And then there's also like another book that I'm going to talk about that I made a mistake over, but I will be getting, hopefully. First of all, we have Hamlet, which is, but this is like the text of 1603 and 1623. So 1603 is like the bad quarto, and then 1623 is the first folio text, that's right. And normally, and there's like quite a large difference between the two, and this one isn't very, like the 1603 one isn't very commonly like performed and stuff like that, but I really wanted to read it because that's just interesting to me that it's so different, and obviously the changes and like the choices that people decided were the like, you know, that actually were the original or whatever, obviously coincide with this idea that like Shakespeare is a genius, so he can't have written like a bad one, or like at least Hamlet can't be bad. I started reading the introduction, which is why there's this here, because I wanted to see how it was kind of like contextualizing and talking about the differences between the different quartos. I will say I have not read that many of these, partially because I actually tried really hard to read the amount on my shelves of books that I had owned before 2025 as I was bringing these in, and I focused less on then trying to read them immediately. I think I have only read one of these so far, but yeah, I mean, I hope to read these soon. Yeah, one of them I think I'd like to pick up for Shorty September, but anyway, I will keep going. The next book I have is Indiana by George Sand. This is translated by Sylvia Raphael. This is like a translation from the French. I have been doing this project this year to read French literature, and I've wanted to read George Sand for a really long time, so I just decided to like pick this up so that it's on my shelf for when I get to it. And yeah, so this is about like a beautiful and innocent young woman who is married at 16 to a much older man. Yeah, I guess I also was like became more interested in George Sand, although I was already interested in her, because there's so few like women writers that are talked about in lots of like literary traditions, or like, you know, when people talk about like Russian classics or French classics and they like maybe mention one woman, and maybe that woman is like George Sand. For Russian classics they never mention a woman basically, so, and yeah, I find that frustrating, so obviously I want to like remedy that, because I think that women did contribute to the literary tradition in every single place in the fucking world, even if like their voices have been erased. Like how people produce literary works relied on the labor of women, so like they were just part of literary tradition even if they were also like shut out of it after the fact, or like, yeah, erased, forgotten, like whatever. But I also did get really interested in reading more from George Sand because like maybe 2 years ago now I read briefly A Delicious Life by Nell Stevens, which is about George Sand, on like a holiday to Mallorca, and I just loved that book so much, so it just made me more like inclined towards her. The next book I got is The Juniper Tree by Barbara Comins, which is in this really beautiful NYRB edition, and I think this is like a sort of Cinderella fairy tale retelling. I've read one Barbara Comins. I listened to some people talk about this, I think in some kind of podcast, and then also someone I follow on Instagram who I think used to make videos here called Sporadically Reading, recently, I mean maybe not that recently anymore, but like fairly recently talked about like her love of Barbara Comins in general, and also maybe specifically this book, I think. I will link her Instagram below if you're interested, because yeah, she has like really interesting reading, and I do really love the videos on her channel, but obviously she's not like updating there anymore. Yeah, it just like pushed me to pick this up. After reading Who Was Changed and Who Was Dead by Comins last year, I have been intrigued as to what she's doing next, because her work is sort of surrealist in a quite interesting way, and yeah, strange, sort of difficult I guess, but like intriguing. Another book I got is this collection of short stories, I believe they're all short stories, by the like gay Victorian writer Vernon Lee, This is Hauntings and Other Fantastic Tales. Yeah, it's like supernatural tales. There's a quote from Vernon Lee on the back that says, "My ghosts are what you call spurious ghosts, of whom I can affirm only one thing, that they haunted certain brains and have haunted, among others, my own." I think it will also be probably interesting from like a gender and sexuality perspective, because Vernon Lee is kind of a figure of like sexual dissidence, and yeah, I think there's some discussion about like nom de plume, like, you know, sort of self-fashioning through like a male author name that happens for like some women, but obviously sometimes that's more than just about wanting the like authority of like a man's name. Like, I don't think people really are arguing that George Eliot like had a particularly complicated or non-heterosexual relationship to her own gender, even though she went by a George Eliot, which is not her like woman name, whereas with Vernon Lee, I think like there's definitely an argument to be made. It's interesting because on the back of this, the description actually doesn't use any pronouns for like Vernon Lee. It just refers to her, them, him as Lee, which I think is interesting, and like I don't know if it was done on purpose, but it's kind of an interesting sort of choice slash, yeah, perhaps speaks to some of what I was saying as well. Next we have It Lasts Forever and Then Its Owner. Oh, that's not what it says. Then we have It Lasts Forever and then, okay, why can't I say this? It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne de Marken. I really don't like Fitzcarraldo. I really don't like their whole like vibe. I think it's very like bro-y, and then of course I forgot the word. We love brain fog. Pretentious. I think it's pretentious. Yeah, I just also really dislike this sort of vibe of like minimalist like book covers, like the idea that like that means they're much more worthy because they don't waste money on like making something beautiful. But obviously the entire history of books as like objects for people to read and own is all like tied up in that. It's so stupid, because also people are buying it for the like prestige and value of the cover itself now too, where it's like it means I look like an intellectual. Anyway, I did get this because this won the Ursula K. Le Guin prize last year, I believe. Could be the year before. I think it was last year. And I was like looking at the prize because they recently fairly recently announced the like latest prize shortlist, and I wanted to see if I had read like one thing from each of the years it's been going, and like the year that this won, I hadn't read anything from that shortlist. I don't have to read like the book that won, although some of the books that won obviously I would like to read, but they can be quite hard to get and are mostly quite like American published. But then I saw that this was being published in the UK with Fitzcarraldo, so I thought that this would be the one I picked, and it did win, so that's also why I thought it would be good. It is of course very short, so perhaps I will try to read it in Shorty September. I think it's kind of like zombie stuff, which definitely intrigued me. I haven't really seen very many people talk about this at all, but people tend to like sleep on the Ursula K. Le Guin like shortlist stuff, which I think is a massive shame, because it tends to be really interesting, even if I haven't read like loads from it. Yeah, it's a good prize and I would recommend it. Anyway, so I'm gonna shut up now, and there we go. Unfortunately had to add this Fitzcarraldo to my shelves. Sorry for everybody who loves Fitzcarraldo. The only book that I have read from this pile is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, which I bought and I immediately read because I found it in a charity shop and I was like, oh, I really wanted to read that, and then I did. Yeah, so I won't review it here, but it was a very big book when it came out, and it is about like a sapphic relationship that is abusive, and it also is thinking about that in terms of like the sort of historiography, or like that's not quite the right word, but like the kind of body of work that focuses on like queer women relationships where there is abuse, and thinking about them in terms of how they engage with like violence and how they have been engaged with in terms of how people think about like queerness, lesbianism. It's written in the main thing I feel like people know and talk about is that it's written in various different ways. So every chapter starts with Dream House as, and then it like has, you know, as inciting incident, as not a metaphor, as famous last words, as rapture, as mystical pregnancy, as choose your own adventure. Then we have a Rose Macaulay book, so now I have yet another one of hers to read, even though I still also have another on my bookshelf. That I read Potterism, this, recently, and I really liked it, and I thought it was just really interesting. I suppose maybe I didn't really like it, but I was like intrigued to see what more Rose Macaulay was writing. And also I guess for a while I was like, and I kind of would still like to keep going, but I don't know if I can, but I was like really interested in like late 1910s, early 1920s novels, and like the writing that was produced. I did think about reading that Ford Madox Ford Parade's End novel series, although I think they're actually maybe slightly later, maybe 1924, but they're about like the First World War. And yeah, and then Rose Macaulay was writing like through that. Anyway, so then I picked up this, which is Non-Combatants and Others, Writings Against War 1916 to 1945. The like main part of it, I believe, is Non-Combatants and Others, which is a novel from 1916, which is anti-war. And then this also contains some journalism by Rose Macaulay from 1936 to 1945, some of which is from Time and Tide, which is interesting because that's quite like a feministy paper, and there's another short story as well. So yeah, looking forward to getting to this at some point. I do still also really want to find a copy of Whatnot by Rose Macaulay that isn't horribly ugly. And I really wish that the press that published this, which also published Potterism, which also had an edition of Whatnot, was still open so I could do that, because I would now do that. Okay, the next thing is a play. Kind of bookending this with like early modern plays, but this is The Witch of Edmonton by Thomas Dekker, John Ford and William Rowley in a classic New Mermaids edition, which I've talked about loving on here before. It's got lots of underlinings by someone and quite a long introduction, it seems. I was listening to my favourite like Shakespeare scholar, Emma Smith, like her series Not Just Shakespeare, where she talks about like Elizabethan and Jacobean popular theatre, and one of the plays she talks about is this, The Witch of Edmonton, and it seemed really interesting. And there's also like a dog in this who's like a demonic dog, and I just really fascinated to read the play directly as opposed to like synthesized through Emma Smith's very interesting but like, you know, still like mediated lecture that I listened to about this. Yeah, because it seems like a really interesting play about witchcraft, and also not really about witchcraft, about like blaming women, and also being like, well, if you make women into scapegoats, they can kind of become that way. About like supernatural things that are also not supernatural at all, but also still kind of are. Like, it sort of seems like it's a play that's trying to have its cake and eat it too, about witches. But yeah, I don't know, I'm intrigued to read it. Maybe I can get some people to read it with me, and then we can do a fun read-along thing. I don't know. Okay, the next book I have is this one, which is The Door by Magda Szabo, translated by Len Ricks, which is also another NYRB copy, though I didn't quite realise that it would have this stupid sticker on it, but anyway. Yeah, this is a book I've really wanted to read for ages. She is kind of like Women in Translation Month's, like, I don't know, not cheerleader, but like what's the, like, icon, you know? And I've heard really good things about this. It arrived quite late, so there was no way I was going to read it in August, unfortunately. But yeah, I am excited to check it out. I am also really intrigued by Abigail, like another of her novels, but I sort of felt like I should start with this one because it's her most famous. But maybe I made a mistake, but you know, we'll see when I get to it. And yeah, looking forward to checking it out. Okay, and then it's kind of an embarrassing thing, but like so I have been reading, this part I guess is not that embarrassing, I don't know, like, so okay, I've been reading Red Comet, The Blazing Life and Art or something like that of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark, which is this like fucking gigantic, it's like 1,100 pages, you know, it's a 45-hour audiobook that is a biography of Sylvia Plath. And like, I haven't really been like super into Sylvia Plath for a really long time. I would say like as a teenager I did quite like her, although I also feel like I didn't read that much of her work. I would say I probably still liked The Bell Jar. I think it's like an interesting novel, and I thought it was good when I read it, which was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, who knows, but a while. But you know, I also have felt frustrated with the way that like Sylvia Plath has been lionized as like a feminist icon, when, you know, reading her work you can see she has a real like disregard for people of colour, especially, like, I mean, there's sections of The Bell Jar that are really racist, and then also although I don't know that I really had realised this until now rereading some of her poetry, but the way that she like commodifies or like uses as material in this really like sick way, I think, the like trauma and yeah, like the life experiences of Jews who lived through or didn't live through the Holocaust, which is crazy in her poems because she's writing in like 1960, and so there's like people who really are like alive and just survived, and like some of the things she says crazy to me. And it is kind of interesting having been like on Tumblr when people loved Sylvia Plath, and also sort of being into it too, and then like rereading her poetry and being like, this was here the whole time and you guys were all saying it was really good. Wild. Anyway, this isn't about that. I do actually also, I ordered, I think like maybe at like 4 a.m. like a couple years ago when I was not well, the Unabridged Journals of Sylvia Plath, which I have not read, but I will perhaps read at some point. Yeah, I think I will read. Oh, there she is. I guess I say all this because I feel like it's important to me for people to know where I'm coming from in terms of being like interested in her life and in her work, because I think she's been like softened and or yeah, sort of mystified into a very particular figure, partially because she killed herself and she's a woman and she wrote about being a woman and wanting to kill yourself, which of course like a lot of young women like highly identify with. But yeah, so anyway, so I've been reading that Heather Clark biography. I've been like sort of enjoying it, also struggling with it. I'm definitely gonna make like I think a dedicated review. I mean I've still got like I'm like 16 hours in or something, so I still got like 20 hours left. Which is literally like, I could have read like 4 books in the time that I'll have read this book. No, probably like 5. But anyway, I was looking up people's reviews of the book to see what they were saying, and I think in a video review somebody made, they mentioned this book, which is The Silent Woman, Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes by Janet Malcolm, and it just sounded really interesting. I think it was based off of an article that Janet Malcolm wrote, and it is like much older than the Heather Clark book. It came out, what, in like early 2000s maybe? No, 1993. But I think this book is also thinking about the work of a biography, which is something I find myself asking a lot as I am listening to the Heather Clark biography, because I'm kind of like, what is this doing? Why are we doing it? Like, why is this valuable or important? And is it valuable or important that I know that like Sylvia Plath got XYZ grades? Like, does that matter to like her as a literary persona, to her as a person, to like her image as an intellectual? Yeah, so I think obviously this like is clearly focusing specifically on like Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes and their relationship, which of course is like highly contentious for very many reasons. Yeah, but I just thought that this sounded really interesting because it kind of is blending, hopefully, like a critical kind of approach to what a biography does, what a literary biography might do, with also Sylvia Plath herself and her own life. I think it's also specifically focused on this one particular biography called Bitter Fame by Anne Stevenson, and maybe like kind of critiquing that and how it represents like the relationship between Plath and Hughes. I also think like some of me doing that justifying is because like I do like Sylvia Plath, I guess. Even though I see with fairly clear eyes, I think, her fuck ups, her insensitivities, her like racism, her like anti-Semitism. Like I think I can see that and still be kind of fascinated by like what she's doing and also her life. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm gonna make like a dedicated video to the Heather Clark biography, and maybe hopefully I will have read this also, so I can kind of talk about it in there, but I'll see. There's no like rush. I've been talking for too long, so I'm just gonna say the book that I mentioned at the beginning that like isn't here is The Storm of Echoes, I think that's what it's called, by Crystal Dabo, translated I think by Hildegard Sahl, which is the 4th and final book in the Mirror Visitor series, and it is a translated book, and I kind of was like maybe hoping to read it sort of during August for Women in Translation month, but that didn't work out, so hopefully I will get to that soonish, like whenever. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to share today with these books. Let me know if you've read any of them, or if I should like prioritize getting to one over the other, or if you're interested in participating in reading The Witch of Edmonton with me, and what part you'd like to play. I obviously want to play the dog, or the witch, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, okay, thank you for your time. I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye.